I'm your host, Steve Matthews. Thanks for joining me for episode 136. Today, we're going to be talking about Donald Trump's tough week. But before we get on to that, I just wanted to say hi to everybody. I know it's been a while since I've been on, almost 6 months, hard to believe, since I've done any kind of podcasting or live streaming. I didn't fall down a black hole. I swear, I really didn't. I've been busy, and I had this thing that I had to do for work. Well, I guess I didn't have to do it. I chose to do it. It was a certification program that I went through. And that dealt with my job. I work in the retirement plan business, doing some administration for retirement plans, things like 401ks, that type of thing. And anyway, this was a certification. It was a course that was designed to improve my knowledge, expand my knowledge of the retirement plan business, which I know sounds incredibly boring, and actually it kind of is. But anyway, that's how I make my money for right now. That's where the Lord has me, and I thought I'd take the opportunity to learn a little bit more while I can. So I'm glad that I had the opportunity to do that. I had an exam back on June 4th, and the thing is, I don't even know if I passed yet or not. You get this little blurb at the end of it. It says it could take up to 10 weeks to get your testing results. Well, I still haven't gotten them yet, and it's about halfway. It's been about 5 weeks. So I guess we're about halfway there. So eventually, sooner or later, I'll find out if I passed. Lord willing, I hope that I did. I pray that I did, and we'll see if that comes through. Anyway, so that's what I was busy with, and it's just, life just gets, how life is. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that goes on. There's a lot of things that I put off doing while I was studying for that, and anyway, just one thing leads to another, and it's been a hard time trying to get back in front of the microphone, but I'm glad that I finally did. It's great to be back and doing this again. The last podcast I did, I went back and looked. It was January 19th, so it was right around the time that Donald Trump was inaugurated. It's been almost exactly 6 months, and here we are 6 months later, and well, there's been some things that have gone on here recently in the Trump presidency that I don't like some of the things that I'm seeing, and I don't think I'm the only one. I voted for Donald Trump 3 times, and I've never been under the impression that Donald Trump's a perfect man. We're all sinners, and we all make mistakes, and I think Donald Trump has. I think he was certainly the better candidate of the two that we had running, and he said some very good things, and I think that he's a man who, at least to my mind, I think has the interest of the American people at heart. But as I said, he's a flawed man. He makes mistakes, and I'm not someone would ever call myself a Trump. I'm not all about Trump. It's not like anything and everything that Donald Trump says and does is perfect, and that I have to go along with it. I think as Americans, our first loyalty, just speaking as Americans, is to the Constitution of the United States of America. And we have to measure what a president does, of course, against Scripture. That's the ultimate measure. What someone does or what someone says, but as a subordinate standard, certainly as Americans, we have to measure what the president does and says against the Constitution. And when you look at some of the things that have been coming out of the Trump administration here over the past week, even just the past few weeks, not even just this past week, but even in the weeks preceding that, I had some real concerns. And I pray for Donald Trump. I pray that he would succeed in fixing some of the many problems that we have, but it seems like more and more that he's decided or has been drawn off into a direction maybe that's not exactly what some of us had hoped for. Now, I'm not so naive as to believe that was never possible. My stance on Donald Trump is vote for him and support him when he says things that are right. It's also fair to find fault when he's doing things that are not right. And there've been just a whole run of things here recently that concern me about his presidency. There was an actual post out on X by Chris Rossini, He's one of if you ever watch Ron Paul Liberty Report, he sometimes is on there, tends to talk about economic things, but he posts quite a bit on X. And he seems to me to be a pretty sharp guy. I mean, he's a Roman Catholic, so there's that. But when you listen to his or you read his posts, I mean, he's actually very much a political Protestant. He might be offended if I said that about him. I don't know, but he is someone that seems to really believe in limited government and constitutional government. And of course, those are biblical ideas. Those are not Roman Catholic ideas. So, I mean, he's someone that I think, at least from a political standpoint, is a lot more in the camp that I'm in than some other people. Even though we have some, obviously some differences in terms of faith matters. And that's, I think sometimes that term is what they call it, a blessed inconsistency. But I've always appreciated Chris Rossini's analysis. I think he's a sharp guy. He's a good thinker and a good writer. And he tends to steer away from a lot of hyperbole and kinds of crazy posts that sometimes you see on X. He's not one of these guys out there saying, "Look at me, look at me, look at me," that type of thing. He seems to be he's understated, and I think he's a mature thinker and a good poster. He really does post a lot of good stuff. Now, there's a post that he put out. This was a couple of days ago on July the 10th. And this is what Chris Rossini said. He said, "Mr. President has had quite a week this week." He lists out some bullet points. He says, covering up for Epstein, arming Ukraine, approving more COVID fake vaccines for kids, and endorsing Lindsey Graham. So yeah, that's four not so great things. And that was just this past week. If you go back in the weeks prior to that, he's actively engaged his political advisors in finding a way to primary and to remove the best congressman in Congress. I'm talking about Thomas Massie. He's sent his top political guys to Kentucky to have him ousted. They've even established, in Trump's direction, a political action committee to remove Thomas Massie from office. And I think what was the sort of the final straw in as far as Donald Trump was concerned was Massie's Massie's challenging Trump's authority to go bomb Iran. You might remember, what was that? I guess has it been not quite maybe around a month. It was like the middle of June 13th. So I guess it's been pretty close to a month, where they sent those B-2 bombers over and they bombed those nuclear sites in Iran. And Thomas Massie was saying, Mr. President, you don't have the authority to do that. And he doesn't have the authority on his own to do that. That requires an act of Congress to do that. And Thomas Massie's right. And, I think Thomas Massie is a great congressman. He's a principled man. Of course, Thomas Massie opposed Donald Trump on the big, beautiful bill. That was another problem. We've been listing off some problems here from just this past week, but there's also the big, beautiful bill, which some people have calling it the big bankruptcy bill, because it's going to massively add to the debt. And of course, what Donald Trump says is we're going to grow our way out of it, which I think is a very doubtful proposition. I don't think you can find any examples of a country that was seriously in debt, going into further debt and growing its way out of the debt. And it's essentially what Donald Trump is arguing, is what he wants us to believe, is that in order to fix America's debt problem, we have to take on more debt. Well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense on the surface. It really doesn't. If you or I run up debts, and those debts are mounting. I mean, what we do is we don't go out and go further into debt. What we do is we have to tighten our belts. We have to spend less. Maybe we have to take a second job or get a higher paying job, increase our income, some combination of those things. Maybe we have to sell some stuff. But I mean, we have to live within our means. But of course, the federal government, they haven't lived within their means since 2013, or excuse me, since 1914, when the Federal Reserve was established. They've been able, to pretty much print their way out of things. That is, they've got this giant counterfeiting machine, and when they need more money, they just go, have the Federal Reserve create that money. and that debt has built up and built up. And just to give you kind of a sense of how the debt's built up, I remember and when I was in high school, so this goes back to the early 80s, um, under Ronald Reagan, there was there was a story in the news that America had just, for the first time in its history, gone $1 trillion in debt. So it took from 1776 all the way up to 1981, 82, 83. So I don't remember the exact year, but sometime in the early 80s. So over 200 years to pile up $1 trillion in debt. Well, from that time, from the early 80s up until now, so a period of just a little bit over 40 years, we've gone from $1 trillion in debt to, I think we just hit the official number is 37 trillion. So it took 200 years to pile up 1 trillion, but now it's taken roughly a little bit over 40 years to add on another 36 trillion. So, I mean, not only has the debt increased, but the rate of the increase has gone up, and it's continuing to accelerate. And of course, some of that really is based upon the currency system that we have right now. The debt-based currency system that we have right now requires an ever increasing debt load, and that debt load must increase at a faster and faster pace. Now, there's going to come a point, I don't know when, but that's not going to be sustainable. At some point, at some point, debt becomes a problem. I don't know when that point is. I mean, if you had asked me some time back, I would, 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, I'd have said, well, it's going to be soon, right? Well, here we are in the year of our Lord 2025, and the debt machine's still cranking on. And Donald Trump's a big debt guy. I mean, back in his first administration, he was all on board with the CARES Act. That was all that money that they spent when they shut the country down for COVID. And interestingly, Thomas Massey had a clash with him at that time. And then they kind of smoothed things over, but now they clashed over the big beautiful bill. They clashed over the bombing of Iran, and now Trump wants him out of office. They're going to try to primary him. That's a big mistake. I think that Thomas Massey, I mean, Thomas Massey is really the epitome of MAGA, make America great again. He wants us to obey. He wants the federal government to obey the Constitution. He wants the federal government to live within its means. And I think that that's making America great again. I think where, we have gone far, far off the rails compared to our founders' vision for the country and the words that they set down in the Constitution, and we need to get back to that. The Constitution, that's actually political Protestantism. There was this great quote from Samuel Adams, I think shortly before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and he gave this speech, and he says, today the reign of political Protestantism will begin. So what's political Protestantism? Well, I mean, political Protestantism is basically what we had in this country at our founding. You have a limited government, you have limited constitutional government, you have private property. John Robbins called that constitutional capitalism, and that's essentially in a nutshell what political Protestantism is. Historic Americanism. America was founded as a Protestant republic. I think that probably is probably not real popular with some people, but I mean that's the truth. It is and always has been that. Even though it's the state of that political Protestantism has decayed quite a bit over the past 249 years. That's kind of funny to say 249 years too, because of course next year and Donald Trump has talked about this. We'll be celebrating the 200th anniversary of founding of America as an independent nation. The signing of the Declaration of Independence, of course, was in 1776. And the thing that kind of really just astounds me about that is I remember really well the bicentennial. That was a big deal in 1976, and there was all kinds of celebrations and that over that, and it was a big deal. And that's something I remember that very fondly as a kid. I was 10 years old at that time, And one thing I remember is I've got some family that lives in the Philadelphia area, and we went up to visit them the year before that in 1975, kind of on a summer vacation, and we did the tour of all of the historic, patriotic places and that were up there in the Philadelphia area. And there's a lot of great stuff up there, and Independence Hall, Liberty Bell, Valley Forge, those sorts of things. Ben Franklin's house, Betsy Ross's house. I'm just naming a few things off the top of my head, but there are some other things as well. And the thing I always remember is you go to a place and they'd say closed for renovation. This is in '75 because they were all getting ready for the big bicentennial celebration. And now here we're coming up on the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And yeah, it makes me realize I'm almost 60 years old. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, yeah. I had a lot more hair back in '76 too. I guess that's one of the other big differences. So anyway, I don't know how I got onto that topic, but anyway, yeah, Donald Trump has had a difficult week, and I think one of the things, especially that has people really upset right now, and I think rightfully so, is this whole deal over Jeffrey Epstein, and how. There was all this lead up. There was an interview with Donald Trump. I think it was from Fox News back when he was running for president last year. They asked him, "Are you going to release the JFK files?" He says, "Yes." "Are you going to release the Martin Luther King files?" He says, "Yes." "Oh, are you going to release the Jeffrey Epstein files?" "Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm going to release these things." And of course, statements from the Attorney General Pam Bondi when she first got in there, and she's saying things like, "Oh, well, yeah, those files are on my desk, and I'm getting ready to look at them." And there's another interview. She said, "We've got these videos and all that." And now they come out this past week. They say, "Well, there's no files, there's no videos. We're not going to release any of these things." Or I don't think they said there's no videos. They said there's no files, there's no client list or anything like this. Forget about it. Move along. There's nothing to see here. And of course, Donald Trump's been very emphatic about that. And there are a lot of people who are genuinely upset about this. I'm one of them because I really think this whole thing reeks of a cover-up. And this is the kind of thing that really needs to change. In his book, Christ and Civilization, John Robbins talks some about the effects of the Reformation and how the effects that had on government. And one of the things that he wrote about was how when the Reformation came to Geneva, Switzerland, for example, that the city government had to reduce its numbers by about a third and submit to an annual audit, so that they reduced the size of the government and they became more transparent. And one of the big problems that we have in this country is lack of transparency from our government. You always hear these things. "Well, it's a matter of national security. We can't tell you." Well, that's nonsense. I think that type of thing is invoked just because people don't want the public to know what it is that they're doing. Not because there's some critical national security issue about this. And I would say this whole thing with this Jeffrey Epstein issue, this actually is a matter of national security, because there are a lot of people who think, and I think there's a lot of good evidence to support this, that the whole thing with Jeffrey Epstein was a probably a little bit of the background story. I mean, that supposedly, what was happening, there were all of these rich and famous people, a lot of them American politicians, who had relationships with Jeffrey Epstein. They flew on the so-called Lolita Express to his private island in the Caribbean. He had his own little island there. They fly a jet down, and the understanding is that there was, pedophilia going on between a lot of these very powerful politicians and young underage girls, and it's very salacious stuff. And what people don't talk about, or what's not often, has not at least previously been discussed in public, is why this was happening. You may remember that Epstein, his madam, some people call it that, call her that, this Ghislaine Maxwell. Well, I remember they had that trial, you know, I think was that 2 years ago, I think it was. And it was interesting, you know, there was all of this salacious stuff. Oh, you know, that you know, they're trafficking these young girls for sex and all of this other type of thing. And there was a lot of coverage. I mean, I know Fox News covered it a lot, and there are a lot of other news organizations that covered that. But there's one thing that they didn't tell you. I mean, if all you get is your information from Fox News, you're never going to know about this. Although there's lots of people on the internet that will tell you about this. But Ghislaine Maxwell's father was a man by the name of Robert Maxwell. And Robert Maxwell was a famous, he was sometimes called Israel's super spy. He was Jewish. She's Jewish. I mean, they were Israelis. Robert Maxwell was Israeli. And he was kind of almost, he was like a real life Mossad James Bond kind of a figure. I mean, he was a very well known. There's even a book out there on him, about him. He died under some very mysterious circumstances, interestingly enough. And Ghislaine Maxwell is, so I mean, she's got some very close Mossad ties. Jeffrey Epstein has very close ties to Israel. And apparently what was going on, and this is what a lot of people think, I mean, there's a lot of smoke here. You know, you don't have a smoking gun. We have a lot of circumstantial evidence, though, to suggest that what was going on with Jeffrey Epstein was working for Mossad. And that whole thing on that whole Epstein Island thing, that was all what's sometimes called a honeypot operation to get people down down to that island. They do things that they shouldn't be doing, and they get this stuff on film. They have videos of it. They have photographs of it, you know, and then it's like, well, Mr. Senator, you know, that's a great career you got going. You know, it'd be a shame if we released these files and, you know, you end up going to jail and being impeached and publicly humiliated. But, you know, all that can be avoided if you just vote for this appropriations bill for Israel. That seems to be what was going on there. It was a honeypot operation. And so, I mean, apart from just the salacious aspect of it, there is a very serious national security aspect to this. What appears to be that, you know, and the fact that this is being covered up at the highest levels, you know, and I think it's pretty obvious that there's an attempt to cover this stuff up, is a very serious concern, something that should concern every American, you know. And, you know, our government is very obviously in very deep with Israel. And this is a problem. This is a serious problem. And it's one of the, and so you have to ask yourself, you know, one of the reasons, I mean, why is our government, why is our Congress, why are our presidents so heavily influenced by Israel? I mean, could it be, does this have something to do with it? Are they being blackmailed? You know, I was watching some things here this evening. There's a guy, Lee Stranahan, who I think is a good reporter. He does some good work. And in his opinion, I mean, Donald Trump seems to be acting as though he's being blackmailed. You know, he put out this great big long post today, defending Pam Bondi and basically telling everybody to shut up about Jeffrey Epstein. You know, we're not going to talk about it anymore. Well, we need to talk about this. And, you know, Tucker Carlson had a great speech that he gave just this weekend. I think it was at Turning Point USA, where he highlighted some of the problems that some of the questions that people have about this whole Jeffrey Epstein issue. The mysterious circumstances under which he supposedly killed himself. Yeah, I don't believe that. I didn't believe that at the time, you know, when he had been arrested, and just a few years ago, and he was put into prison in New York. And, you know, everybody, including myself, you know, any people that paid attention to this stuff, and I certainly was on of the same mind, was that, you know, that he was not going to ever get out of prison alive. And sure enough, he died in prison under very mysterious circumstances. You know, oh well, you know, the camera just wasn't working, and now they say, oh well, there was video footage, but somehow there's a minute missing. By golly, there's a minute missing out of that videotape, and we just don't know. But you got to believe us, he killed himself. Yeah, I don't. There's some really fishy stuff here, And people need to, I don't think we can let this go as, I mean, if you really do believe in making America great again, maybe we need to say we need to make America transparent again, or make government transparent again. Because one thing we have right now is we just don't have transparency. I do not trust the government. I don't trust the words coming out of the mouths of politicians or high government officials. This is a serious problem. We have a very serious credibility problem institutionally across the board in this country. You just cannot get the truth out of people. And this isn't a partisan comment either. I mean, because the Democrats are horrible about this. I mean, did you trust anything that the Biden administration said? I certainly didn't. The whole thing with COVID, for example, I mean, that was a gigantic lie. And unfortunately, it appears that the Trump administration is carrying on some of this stuff. And one of the things that Chris Rossini has criticized Donald Trump about is the fact that he has, he approved more fake COVID vaccines for kids. Nobody should be taking COVID vaccines. Now, I refer to this as the poison death shot. And the fact that these things are still being rolled out and still being pushed on kids, on anybody, and certainly on kids, I mean, is just, it's ridiculous. And, that stuff needs to stop. It should be pulled off the market, in my opinion. And I think there need to be some very serious investigations into that. But of course, that doesn't happen because, again, this is one of these things where, the rich and powerful do things that they want to do, and nobody's ever held accountable. And this has to change. You cannot sustain a free society when you don't have the rule of law. And we have the rule of law for you and me. I mean, those things apply to you and me, but they don't apply to people in high places, and that's a serious problem. That is not Christian government. That is really a reversion to sort of almost a form of monarchism, where there was one law for the king and one law for the nobles, and then there was a law for all the peasants. And the peasants, well, you could be punished to the uttermost for some minor infraction, but I mean, if you were a higher up, you could get away literally with murder, and that is a huge problem. That's not the rule of law. That is not biblical justice. In the Bible, we read that God's not a respecter of persons, but unfortunately, our government more and more has become a respecter of persons. And if you're a highly placed person, if you've got a lot of money, you can do things that would send most of the rest of us to jail for multiple lifetimes. You can do them and you can get away with them. And nobody seems too terribly interested in pursuing justice. In a lot of cases, they actually seem to be actively covering up. And that's what it looks like Donald Trump's doing right now. And that's what it appears like. And that is a very unfortunate thing. And we can pray that the Lord would bring him to repentance for that, and that we would finally get some truth. The American people deserve to hear the truth. Anyway, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I'm going to make this a short one, and Lord willing, I'll be back again next week. I plan to be anyway, and hopefully do a little bit more. Kind of work back into to getting my streams and all that out there. I hope that. Like I say, it's great to be back in front of the camera again, back and talking about some of the stuff that I'm interested in. I hope that you are as well. And wish everyone a blessed Lord's Day tomorrow. And until we talk again, may the Spirit of truth guide you in all truth as you read and study God's Word.